And me too.
Cool.
I'm going to do looking at everyone so that people know what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Yep. I'm going to hop down and I'm going to sit in the audience.
All right. All right, so let me just make sure that I'm live real quick. Yep, I'm live. Cool, good to go. I'm going to switch over to this. And all right, guys, I am King Sithis, and I am here with my friend Liquid Zulu. Say hello, Liquid.
Hello, everyone.
And I decided that I wanted to interview Liquid Zulu because I am a huge fan of Liquid Zulu. I could say he kind of, just to give a little bit of a backstory, he kind of showed me Anarcho-Capitalism. He was the one that opened the door to Anarcho-Capitalism. I used to be a normal libertarian, just your average old libertarian. I was aware of Anarcho-Capitalism, but the thing was I didn't really know how it would work, the ideology behind it, and things like that. And then I happened to stumble upon Liquid Zulu's YouTube channel from one of his socialism videos, Socialism is Impossible. And then from there, I just started binge watching a lot of your videos, Liquid Zulu. And man, I gotta say, and then from your YouTube channel, I got, recommended to books such as, from Hans Hermann Hoppe and other YouTube channels such as Praxman, Fabian Liberty, and Anglo Libertarian. And from those guys and you, I've sort of turned, I now can confidently call myself an anarcho-capitalist. So I'm really glad to have you on. So thank you very much, man.
Yes, that's good to hear. With such a nice intro, I feel we got to make this a good stream then.
Yeah, man. So I am now, I consider myself to be an anarcho-capitalist, but I don't fully have the, unlike you, I don't have the full knowledge of the ideology, so I wrote down a couple questions that I kind of wanted to ask you about anarcho-capitalism. So these aren't all my questions. These are some questions that some friends of mine wanted me to ask you. These are questions that I asked that people have asked me as a libertarian. And these are just some of these questions are like questions that I wanted to ask you. So yeah, are you ready?
Yep.
All right. So my first question would have to be, what is anarcho-capitalism? What is Ancap?
Sure. So basically, where anarcho-capitalism comes onto the scene is with Murray Rothbard's introduction of praxeology to legal theory. So anarchism was a thing before Murray Rothbard, but they were all very vague about what counts as, a crime, what counts as being ruling, because anarchism just means that we're against rulers. They would have all sorts of crazy theories like, okay, well, maybe usury is ruling someone, maybe we have a labor theory of value, maybe all these different things. Rothbard sort of cut through all of this by taking a hardcore natural law ethic rooted in praxeology and objectivism, basically. And he completed legal theory through this introduction of Austrian economics into it. And that is where we get anarcho-capitalism, because capital theory is very big in Austrianism, Austrian economics. And Ayn Rand, of course, called herself a radical for capitalism. So it's anarchism and it's capitalism, and it's understanding that these two things are inextricably linked. And what this means explicitly is an anarcho-capitalist is someone who advocates the non-aggression principle, where aggression means the initiation of conflict, where a conflict is mutually exclusive actions. So if Crusoe and Friday are on a desert island, Crusoe is using a stick to spearfish, Friday wants to take that stick and use it to stoke his fire. They can't both do these actions at the same time. They're mutually exclusive. So if they both try to do it at the same time, they're in a conflict.
Okay. So a lot of people would normally say, oh, can't can people own things collectively, like generally? Do we have to have private ownership? Do we have to have a system in which one item has to go to one specific person? Why is it that we have to have a private individual system like that?
Sure. So the reason for this is very simply, like, let's imagine we have a set of people, A through Z, and we say they commonly own our stick from before. Well, the entire reason we came up with property rights in the first place was because we have this thing called conflicts, and because of the NAP, we're trying to avoid conflicts, right? So we say that all of them own this stick. Well, what do we do with the conflict between members within this group? Let's say A and B have a conflict over the use of the stick. So A wants to use it to spearfish, and B doesn't want the stick used for this. Well, our legal theory can either say one of these two things. It can either say that spearfishing should happen, or it can say that it shouldn't happen. But both these options contradict our initial presumption. Because if our legal theory says that the spearfishing should happen, well, that means that B doesn't own the stick, because he thought it shouldn't happen, so he doesn't have the right to control the stick. If the spearfishing should happen, sorry, I might have got those mixed up, but you get the idea. One option means that A doesn't own it, one option means that B doesn't own it. But we already assumed that both of them own it. So it implies a contradiction. It's completely out. Sort of the reason why this seems like maybe a niche point, but it does come up in some interesting and important areas. Like, for instance, on the borders debate, people think like, well, maybe the taxpayers collectively own public possessions. Well, that doesn't make any sense. So it can't be that the taxpayers collectively own it, right? You got to have some other justification for restricted immigration in that case. And it comes up, the reason why I came up with this argument was against a Georgist who accepted the non-aggression principle in Austrian economics, but he said that people collectively already own things, so homesteading is therefore a crime. And it's like, well, let's analyze this sort of notion of collective ownership. And I realized, well, it doesn't really make any sense, right? So to whatever degree you have collective ownership, you don't actually have property rights at all. And you can think of the easy reductio case, where if you just assume in your legal theory that Crusoe and Friday both own everything, right? Well, then how do you resolve any conflicts ever, right? You've basically in the exact same situation as when you had no property rights.
So if I could summarize what you're saying, you're basically saying that if two people all basically own the same thing, they can't use that thing at the same time because that's physically impossible. There's like a contradiction going on there. So if one person uses it without the other person's consent, that person is truly the owner of that thing because they are the one that is able to do what they want with that thing. Am I right by saying that?
Well, if you're being able to do something with an item isn't enough to say that you own it, but sort of what ownership means is the right to possess or the right to control something. But two people can't have the right to control the same scarce means because they might want to do two different things with it. So you have to have it that one of them doesn't have the right to control it.
True. So if one person is controlling it, they're you would say they're the one that's really the one that owns it, despite the other controlling it.
Well, it's not just that they are controlling it. It's that our property theory has to say that one of them has the right to control it. So even if the other guy is controlling it, our property theory has to say, well, either he's allowed to control it or he isn't. It can't be that two people are allowed to control the same thing at the same time, because that doesn't make any sense.
I see. So you're basically saying it doesn't matter who has the right. I mean, who is controlling it. It's about whether the person has the right to control it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So basically, if we have a person that both owns the same item, there is no way to basically say that person one or the other person has the right to own that thing or control it because they both own it, right? Basically.
Yeah. Like we have it that A is allowed to control it and A isn't allowed to control it, which is a contradiction.
Which is a contradiction, yeah. So what if but like say we run into a situation where two people decide to put their money together, and buy the same thing, would that not be both of theirs, or would it, like, how would that work?
Sure, so it would depend on how exactly the contract is worded. If a contract is worded that Crusoe agrees to transfer title of the stick to John and Sarah, then that is an invalid contract, because contract theory descends from property theory. It isn't antecedent to it. Right? So you can't just have arbitrary contracts. For instance, another situation where this comes in is I can't have a contract saying I agree to transfer ownership of my body to you, because that situation doesn't make any sense, because it's all about avoiding conflict. So I fundamentally have to own my body, right? I have, in Kinsella's words, an objective link to it. So I'll justify why it is that contract theory has to come after property theory. It has to come after property theory, because if we assume that contract theory is at the root, which a lot of people do, then we have a stolen concept fallacy, because contracts are contracts about property. But wait a minute, we don't even have this idea of property yet, because contract theory is supposed to be at the root. So what is a contract then? It's a contract about property. But what is property? Well, we don't know yet, right? We've stolen the concept of contract from the theory which has property at the root. We have property theory, and then from that we derive contract theory. And it has to be that way. So your contract theory can't arbitrarily decide whatever property arrangement it wants. Property theory has certain rules which come before we ever come to contract theory.
Okay, so if I could state what you're saying, from my understanding, basically what you're saying is that property rights are first and foremost, and or they come before contracts. So if you're going to have a contract, it has to be about private property. And if you don't have a solid, I guess, a solid foundation for your property rights, well, then it's not going to mean anything, like, basically.
Yeah, it would be as worthwhile if we have the contract which says Crusoe transfers title of the stick to John and Sarah. That is saying as much as if I said glabby glooby or I said I transfer title of a square circle to you. Like, it doesn't say anything. It's meaningless. It has no bearing on who actually has title to things, because you can't transfer title to a group, because a group can't have title.
I see. So because you can't solve within because the reason why we have private property right is to resolve conflicts. And if we can't resolve the conflict between the two individuals within that private property situation, then that contract basically doesn't really mean anything in that situation.
Yeah.
No. Okay. So no, that makes sense. Okay. So my next question to you would be, what made you an Ancap? What is Liquid Zulu's origin story? How did you get into the ideology of anarcho-capitalism?
I think initially I was just like a vague, like normie lefty, right? Like everyone in Scotland. And then I saw this, I think probably the end, I'll go with the entry into politics in general. My entry into politics in general, I was like big into like the atheism YouTube sphere, like, Christian gets wrecked, all the old stuff like Dark Matter and Amazing Atheist, all those channels. Then I saw this video like why people hate feminism, and I was like, what? Why would people hate feminism? It was by Sargon of Akkad, and I was like, oh, this video is gonna be stupid. I watched it, I was like, holy shit, yeah, he's right. So I got into politics. Then after, just a vague lefty, yada yada, like centrist, I believe I call myself. And then I saw this video by John Stossel come up like years later, and he was talking about like how libertarianism is good. And I was like, or how regulations are bad. And I was like, regulations being bad? Who would even think this, right? And I watched this John Stossel video. I was like, oh my god, he's right. I started watching all these John Stossel videos, and then I saw this video by a guy called Michael Moreno, who is no longer on YouTube, but some of the OGs might remember him. He did that video where he and his friend cited Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro in a debate contest, and they lost for it, right? So I subscribed to him for that. And then,
I think I've seen that video.
yeah,
Yeah.
he did this one video. I saw it pop up on my subscriptions, and it was saying why the Supreme Court's LGBT ruling is immoral. And it was about how anti-discrimination laws are actually evil. And I was like, who would even think this? And I watched it, and I completely agreed with it. And so I went onto his server, and I was like, oh shit, that's a good video, man. That's incredible. And then, I started talking to anarchists after that. I talked to this guy, Idlework. He convinced me to read a book I've got on my bookshelf over there, The Ethics of Anarcho-Capitalism by Chris Bohrer. I read that, and I was like, yeah, I'm an Ancap now. And I kept talking to smarter and smarter Ancaps until, I got here now. And it's the second I heard about anarcho-capitalism and understood what it was saying, everything just immediately was clear to me in politics. I was no longer just kind of groping for arbitrary policies here and there. I had an actual foundation for the first time. And it's like eye-opening to me. And I cannot understand the frame of mind that people are in when they become an ANCAP and then later they get pipelined off somewhere else. Like, how could you even... I can't even conceive of how that's possible,
Yeah, you know what, man? That's kind of crazy because I got introduced to libertarianism through John Stossel as well. John Stossel, I was just like your normal right-wing libertarian, not libertarian, no, right-wing Republican at that time. I supported Trump and stuff like that. And then I happened to stumble upon him, John Stossel, on Reason. And when I first saw his videos, I was just immediately hooked, and I immediately liked him. And like you said, once I started to move on to libertarianism, I still, even though I was a libertarianist, I still didn't feel like I had a real solid ground to stand on. And it wasn't until I found anarcho-capitalism that, I felt like you said, that now we have like a real philosophical ground to stand on, something to really base our ideology off of. And now it's kind of hard to, like you said, it's like I can't imagine how someone could hear the ideology and then want to leave it. But it would make me probably assume that maybe they probably didn't really fully understand it, or maybe just didn't read into it enough. Maybe I'm not sure.
Either that, or they are doing what is called in the objectivist literature evading. So they are not even just like kind of sitting back and relaxing, not really paying attention, that they are actively trying not to see reality, that they're placing an I wish above an it is, in Ayn Rand's words.
Yeah. Okay, so my next question would be, so how would anarcho-capitalism like work within the real world? Like, how could we privatize everything,
So basically, what is important to note on this point is that anarcho-capitalism isn't describing some specific bureaucratic structure. Like, it's not like, oh, that's an ANCAP society, that's a non-ANCAP society, Anarcho-capitalism is just saying, these are the things which are legal, these are the things which are permissible. So, and the way you go about pushing society towards a more civilized state, towards a respect for property rights, is you have to change the philosophy, because everything is descendant from philosophy. Philosophy comprises the broadest abstractions that are possible. So a person's philosophy, everybody has a philosophy, even if they don't know it. Even the guy who is sitting at the foot of a blowing up volcano and he's praying to the volcano gods to make it stop, he's got a philosophy there. He's operating upon a philosophy, namely a philosophy which says, if he prays hard enough, then he can change reality. That consciousness has metaphysical primary, right? That is a philosophical position there. So, and this is throughout all of society. All you have to do, if you ask, well, why did Nazi Germany come about? People have all sorts of theories about why Nazi Germany came about. Well, maybe they had like reparations they had to pay. Maybe it was all this stuff, yada, yada, yada. Fundamentally, what it is that they had an evil philosophy. They adopted the philosophy of Immanuel Kant, which said that man's reason is impotent, that the will of everyone right? He didn't say this specifically, right? But this is the gist that you get from him, and Hegel perfected it, that you can change reality by what you are into, that truth, what truth means, what objectivity means, is a shared delusion by everyone, right? That logic itself is determined by your brain. So then from that, you get polylogism, trivially, right? Aryans have a different logic to non-Aryans. And then from that, you get Hitler, right? Every horrible event you've ever seen in history, the Dark Ages came about because Plato won out over Aristotle. The Renaissance came about because Aristotle had a resurgence, right? This is the history of philosophy, is the history of human society. So all you have to do, people will try and grope for these individual policies, right? They're like, okay, well, let's just try and get this one win for libertarianism, and then we can get another, they're operating on the wrong level there. They're caring about like, oh, well, did they do this one ban or whatever, yada, yada, yada. They're operating on the wrong level because all of these policy decisions, like Leonard Reed describes politicians as thermometers, right? They are just following the political temperature. We need to be setting the political temperature, and we need to be thermostats, right? And the way you be a thermostat is you change the philosophy. You preach the correct philosophy. And if you do that, then everything else follows. So the most fundamental thing that you have to be doing is learning philosophy and teaching it.
Okay, so if I could reiterate what you said, basically, so if basically what you're trying to say is that the only way that we're going to get to a more Ancap world, you know what I'm trying to say, more people to become Ancaps, we have, as opposed to trying to push for some fundamental policies or government or this and this and that, we need to fundamentally change the ideology behind people. We need to push on people things like the non-aggression principle and stuff like, the things that anarcho-capitalism is founded upon, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't know if that might came through.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So, okay. So, are there any real life examples of ANCAP, throughout the world or society or anything like that that you could think that you know of?
Yeah, there are various fairly free market societies which have existed. There is this series on YouTube, which Prax Ben organized, called like Anarchy in Reality. You can find like the playlist on, I believe, Springtime of Nations channel, which was inspired by a video by Anglo Libertarian on Kospaya, where he noted that Kospaya was a fairly free market society. It was like this place in like Europe, like a city state or whatever. And my entry into that series was medieval Iceland. So medieval Iceland was very, very free market. The only non-free market element was the Lagretta, right, which was the parliament. It had basically there were these chieftains who would go off to this Lagretta, and they would decide on the policies, right? But you could patronize whatever Gothar, whatever Gothi, that's the name for the chieftains, which you wanted. You could go with whoever you wanted, right? And that's pretty free market. The one non-free market element was that for you to become a Gothi, you had to have votes from the other Gothar, right? So there wasn't free entry into the chieftaincy profession, as Roderick Long explains. So from that one non-free market element, like this is a very, very minimal state, very tiny. From there, we then, after Iceland switches to Christianity, they voted in, there were like 4 very powerful families at this point. They got in a tithe to maintain the churches, and everybody had to pay this tithe, right? It was a tax. And then, eventually they completely descended into chaos, and they got Harald Fairhair from Norway, I believe that was not Harald Fairhair. they opted to have him rule them, right? It is from this single inconsistency that they collapsed, right? And that's why it's very important that you have to have complete ideological purity. You have to recognize these things for what they are, right? You have to recognize from the offset, no, it's not good enough to have, competition between Godar. You have to have free entry into the chieftaincy profession in the first place, right? That there isn't free entry. That one non-free market element is poison and must be destroyed, because any compromise between poison and food just means death, right?
So medieval Iceland, it seems like they had a kind of a free market chieftain sort of situation going down, but because of that one sort of voting system and tax system, slowly over time, it sort of corrupted the system and it fell back into a monopolistic government, basically.
Mhm.
Wow, that's pretty interesting. So, moving on to the next question, I feel like I get this question a lot, and I'm not really sure where this comes from. But for some reason, a lot of times when I get into a debate with people tend to ask me this, which is the age of consent. Libertarians, they'll be like, "Oh, you're a libertarian, so you don't believe in the age of consent." "Oh, I heard that you're a libertarian. You don't believe in the age of consent." Uh, is there any truth to that? What do you have to say about that?
Sure. So basically, it doesn't make sense to say that, well, it's an age and then they are able to consent. It's like, no, let's think about this for a moment. It is how psychologically mature they are. That's when we can determine whether or not they're able to consent. You actually investigate the person at hand and see, okay, do they understand what they're saying? Do they understand what it is that they're agreeing to here? Rather than go to Joe Biden and all of Jeffrey Epstein's friends up in Washington and say, hey, do you reckon this girl over here, is she able to consent? Oh, how old is she? Oh, that old? Yeah, I reckon she's probably able, and this is recognized implicitly by everyone. If you see, a 60-year-old woman passed out on the side of the road, you wouldn't say, well, she's 60, so she can consent. It's like, no, because she's passed out, right? She isn't psychologically mature in that specific state. And this is why, for legal theory, a child isn't just the very young. A child is someone who isn't able to communicate their will. So you pass into childhood, in the legal sense, every night when you go to sleep, right? Because if you're asleep, you can't consent to anything, right? You'd have to set it up beforehand. And I couldn't come up to you in your bed and have you, maybe your like arm is moving a little bit and have you sign on a dotted line. It's like, yeah, see, he signed here. I own his house now. Like, no, because he wasn't able to consent. He was asleep. So he's a child, right? That is the correct position. It's not, 1 nanosecond before 18, you're not able to consent. Then 1 nanosecond after, you are able to consent. That doesn't make any sense. The only notion in which an age of consent makes sense is as a proxy for psychological development. But psychological development is fundamentally the root of the question. Can this person actually understand what it is that they're saying? If they can't, then they can't consent to whatever it is that you're trying to get them to do, right?
No, I guess I could agree to that, but I guess like the question generally a lot of people would ask after that would be, okay, so when do we know, like around what age do we know when children are able to sort of make the decision? Or, when are people able to make those decisions? Like generally, like what age would you, libertarians put it?
Well, I mean, it depends how fast the person is developing, I suppose. It's normally like towards the end of the teenage years, they have to develop a certain amount with their brain and their body and whatnot before they can understand these things. So it's normally in the normal range that we understand it to be.
Okay. So it's usually like 18, to 21, maybe earlier for some people.
Yeah.
But you're basically saying that having a hard set number doesn't really apply to every single person because some people, I guess, age earlier than others, or in some another way of putting it.
Or even slower, right?
Yeah.
If you're like have a Down syndrome person, they might not be able to understand that until they're like 30 or something.
Okay. So what do we do with people who are unable to make decisions for themselves? What do we do with those people? Like children and the old and the sick?
So basically, they still own themselves, but we can't figure out what they want done with their property. So they're in a special situation, which is the situation of childhood. Um, Specifically with children, there's an interesting implication is that somebody can be a guardian for them, right? If there's this property lying around and the owner can't say what they want done with it, you can protect that property, but you aren't allowed to just do with it what you want, right? So
Yes.
this is a mistake some people make. They think that parents own their children. Not quite. The parents have a guardianship role. They own the guardianship over those children. So they're allowed to protect those children. They're allowed to raise them, do all this stuff, prevent them from, running into fire or whatever, until such a time that they're able to negotiate for their own care. At which point, they don't need a guardian anymore.
I see. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. But I feel like a lot of people would say, "Oh, that's my child. I should be able to do what I want with my child." Like, well, obviously not whatever they want, but there are some people that think they should be able to raise their child like a certain way, like religiously, or put them in a certain type of school, or teach them a certain way of living. What do you feel like doing that would violate that child's rights in any way, or?
If the way that they're trying to raise them is to, beat them or whatever, then that is a violation, right? They are damaging that child's nascent property at that point. But if they're just like lying to the child or whatever, they're saying, "Hey, did you know that the sun rotates around the earth?" Right? That isn't enough to constitute harm. Like it will impact the child in some way, but that doesn't mean that it's necessarily a crime.
Okay. So you can sort of raise your child with whatever ideology you want, as long as you're not like physically harming, you're not violating the non-aggression principle, essentially.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, that makes a lot of sense, man. That makes sense. Okay. So private police. I tend to get this question a lot. Generally the main question that I get about like private police officers, because I know a lot of people say that we want to replace the police with like insurance companies or privatized system or something like that. So the main question that I normally get with that is like, okay, so what if you're poor and you don't have any money to protect yourself? Like how do you protect yourself?
Well, you can always just, get a gun, or if you can't afford a gun, get a big stick. If you can't get a big stick, then I guess you're fucked, right? Anarcho-capitalist theory doesn't owe you that someone's going to want to protect you when you've pissed off every person in the whole world, right? Find somebody who fucks with you, I suppose, and hey, let's band together and defend ourselves. Or if you can't be bothered to work for like a day to afford some insurance for yourself, right? Then you aren't owed insurance. You aren't owed other people putting their time and their money towards protecting you. It's like there's this meme by MS Paint, Refutations of Anarcho-Capitalism, this old Facebook page, where it's like capitalism gives you only 6 options: work, or starve, or go to college to develop better skills, or get a trade and make more money, or it just lists all these different options, or go into the forest to fucking if because you hate to work with other people in society. It's like you have options there. But like ultimately, if you've pissed everybody on the planet Earth off so much that they don't ever want to associate with you, you're gonna have a pretty hard time about it.
So some people would say, well, if we don't have if we don't have a governmental police system, then people are just going to go and victimize people who don't have money. What's to stop a larger firm from going in and taking some poor person's land or something like that? What do you got to say about that?
Well, the first rejoinder I use to these people is that their reductio against anarcho-capitalism their reason why anarcho-capitalism is so scary is the system that they are advocating. They're saying, well, what if a state comes about? That would be awful. It's like, yeah, I agree, that would be awful. So we should oppose that, right? We should say that is a bad thing, and we should say that it shouldn't happen. It's like, if I were to say rape is bad, we should not have any rape in society. And they said, well, what if somebody rapes someone? I say, well, that's bad, right? So what if somebody rapes people? So we should advocate the rape. It's like, clearly that isn't the solution there. But also just, if you have, as I was saying earlier, a rational philosophy throughout all of society, like most people agree with our philosophy of reason, then you're not going to expect these massive bands of people to form who are going to be predating on people. Like, this is, Atlas Shrugged touches on this, where if you have a context between people of brute muscle against people with brute muscle and the mind, right, they're going to lose every single time, right? Men of the mind win out. So if you have this large contingent, men of the mind, people who understand who it is that their enemy is, and understand what it is that they're supposed to do to fight them, then they have no fucking chance on Earth, right? I mean, fucking US military, biggest military ever in mankind, right? They lost to a bunch of fucking goat farmers in Afghanistan. They lost to a bunch of rice farmers in Vietnam, right? If you have a genuine, like, people don't understand how much capital insurance agencies have, and they know how to allocate that capital correctly, right? Because they don't have faced the economic calculation problem. So if you have a military which is operating upon a profit incentive, they know exactly how to spend their money. They're not wasting trillions and trillions of dollars on jets and aircraft carriers which aren't effective in the type of combat that they're using them for. Then the US military stands no fucking chance on planet Earth, right? Especially if this insurance agency has clients and assets all throughout the US. Like, what are they going to do? They're going to nuke their own fucking territory? No, they're not, right? The second they turn their guns on an American company, right? Presumably this company would have some assets in America. Second they do that, they're dealing with some real hefty lawsuits on their own territory, right? They're dealing with some real heavy pushback from their own people. It doesn't make any sense, right?
Yeah, no, I agree. It's kind of like, I usually give the example of like, in the United States, most people don't support murder. Most people don't think it would be okay if the United States were to invade its own country, if the United States government were to invade the United States. And if, let's say, somebody at the top were to do that and get armed forces to try to attack us, there would be enough people who would disagree with that so that they would have enough resistance to stop that, basically, to put up a fight. And basically what you're saying is that if we have enough people who, or at least a majority of the people who agree with the non-aggression principle, if there is sort of like a situation where that comes about, because the majority of people agree with the non-aggression principle, you would see resistance against that from the people, basically.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Cool. All right. So, another question I normally get: what about nukes?
Yeah, I suppose one point on this nuke discussion is that let's analyze the history of nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons have been used twice on human populations, and both of those times were by a state. Right? So I'm not sure why it is that we should be worried about companies with nuclear weapons when we know the track record of states with nuclear weapons. They ain't fucking good, right? States have been using nuclear weapons for decades to kill and oppress millions of people, right? This is sort of laughable to me that we're worried about, well, what if the fucking mad scientist gets his hands on one? Well, they fucking did. And his name was J. Robert Oppenheimer, and he worked for the US government. And that's where the problem comes in. Like, for a business, they're trying to make money, right? I don't see the profit in nuking millions of people, killing off potential customers. That doesn't strike me as a very good business model, you know?
So some people would say, oh, but, if anyone can buy a nuke, what if somebody who's crazy, who has a lot of money, decides to buy a nuke and somehow launch it? What if somebody like, say, Kanye West, a lot of, goes and buys a nuke and he decides to try to blow up Israel or something like that? Like something crazy. What would you have to say about that?
Sure. So if we get to the point where there's enough of a free market or nukes just be on the open market like that, well, A, we've probably already colonized space and gone off to the stars at that point. B, we've probably developed some pretty good defense mechanisms against nukes that anybody could use. C, why are you selling this nuke to Kanye West? I mean, maybe he wants to use it to build, like, there's like theoretical drives where like you can get interstellar space by like throwing a bunch of nukes out the back and blowing them up, right? So there are legitimate uses for nuclear weapons. But he's like saying, I want to blow up Israel. Like, it seems kind of ludicrous to me. Like, I don't want to start a fucking nuclear war. Why would I deal with this guy? Why would I build the nuke in the first place? Yeah, like, it just doesn't make any sense that this would happen. I mean, it could happen, of course. People have, in the past, gotten their hands on some crazy technology. But this is born out from the status system that these people have gotten their hands on this stuff. It's from the status system that people have developed weapons of mass destruction. A weapon of mass destruction doesn't make any sense. If you're in an Ancap situation, you'd want a weapon of very, very precise destruction. Maybe like a space laser that you can instantly kill one guy from miles and miles away. Something like that. That's what I'd be investing my money into. But a state doesn't really care about collateral damage because they don't have to pay the costs. But you would if you were in an Ancap society.
Got you. So let's say we have like an Ancap state company, not state, country. I live in the United States, so I'm kind of used to saying state, but country. And let's say we have some radical neighbor that threatens to use nukes against the Ancap society, or the Ancap country. What's to really stop that from happening?
I mean, hopefully we would have nuclear defense systems. If we don't, well, maybe we'd have somebody who can go in and shoot the people who are threatening us with these nukes. If we don't, well then, yeah, I guess we're just fucked. I mean, anarcho-capitalism isn't like a magic spell which stops anybody from ever aggressing ever. It's just saying that aggression is bad. And yeah, we could end up with a relatively free society where somebody gets their hands on like, an alien spacecraft crashes down and they get like a giga weapon which just wipes out all life in the solar system. Like, yeah, that could happen. But, the state couldn't defend us against that either, right?
Yeah. All right, no problem, man. So I guess the next question would be, about, I guess, it kind of similar to the nukes thing. Like, what about wars or invasions? If we have an Ancap country where there is no centralized authority, where they can sort of draft people into a army and have like the centralized control, how are you going to defend yourself from a more tyrannical government? Maybe something like China or something huge, like a much larger force that has like unified with some sort of government.
Sure. So one easy way is guerrilla warfare. Like the US government, as I mentioned previously, biggest military in all of human history, most powerful military ever. They couldn't win out against goat farmers or rice farmers, right? They keep trying this shit, but they keep failing. If we have a genuine, like, anarchist region, and these people have been anarchists for some time, they will have built up incredible technology, incredible capital, like unforeseen by anybody, right? In a very short time, if you have capitalism, you can develop some really incredible things. So if they can't beat goat farmers who are using guerrilla warfare, try and beat some fucking like hyper fucking techno-capitalist society using guerrilla warfare. You're not going to do it. Right? You're not going to pierce that shield. And the moment you try and invade some anarchist region, very quickly you're going to piss off all of the big insurance companies in the world by doing that. They're going to have all of the means to fight you and put you into the dirt. And they will be able to allocate those means way more efficiently than you could.
All right, no problem. Okay, so one of the videos that definitely like opened my eyes a little bit that you made was the intellectual property video. The completely like when you were talking about abolishing intellectual property, that definitely was an eye opener to. I've never actually even heard anyone even suggest doing something like that. Suggesting abolishing intellectual property, other than maybe like a few French socialists. So could you give me like a short explanation as to why you're against intellectual property? Why do you think it should be abolished?
Sure. So basically, the fundamental point is property rights are there to avoid conflict. So you can only have a property right in something that is scarce. But ideas aren't scarce. You simply can't have a property right in it. It doesn't make any sense. So when somebody says that they have a property right in an idea, what are they actually saying? What is a copyright or a patent actually? What it is a negative easement. This means an order that other people aren't allowed to use their property in some specific way. So if I have a copyright over, fucking Dune, right, the book Dune, that means that you aren't allowed to use your typewriter and your printing press to make copies of Dune, right? I have a partial right in your property. But how did I get this right? I'm a latecomer to your property. It's your property, right? That I came up with some idea doesn't confer any rights onto me, right? 'Cause what I'm actually doing when I come over and I smash up your typewriter and your printing press is I'm aggressing against you, right? It's what they're doing is they're making an error, which Aristotle recognized, is they are taking form as being the primary there, rather than matter. They think that property rights are in forms of things. But no, the form doesn't actually exist. You can't have form without matter. The form isn't actually a thing out there that you can own and have conflicts over. The form just describes a number of different things. It's just a way of looking at those things mentally, right? That is the sense in which forms exist. They are existing in your mind only. So you simply can't own that. It's not an actual thing out there to own or use or do anything with, right? It just informs you on how to use things out there. And that is sort of the mainline explanation for why an intellectual property right just simply doesn't make any sense. And by the way, they didn't describe them as intellectual property rights when they were conceived. Nobody was concerned about property rights. It was, how do we protect, our fellows, right? How do we protect these people? How do we give out nice government grants? It was the Statute of Anne. It was letters of patent, right? It was literally monopoly grants from the government. That's where we get the word patents from.
Got you. So basically, if I could sum up what you're saying, is that because ideas aren't scarce physical items, there can't be conflicts over the use of these an idea. So basically, if you copy another person's idea, you're not really stealing anything from them. So if they were to stop you from using your own property to copy another person, they would be violating your property right within that thing, basically, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So normally the first question that I would normally get from some people is, well, wait a minute. If you're unable to patent your idea or your invention, then how are you able to make a profit if some person is able to just take your idea and then just straight up copy it and then sell it to the masses? Like, what can you do about that?
So the first point on that front is your failed business model isn't my problem. If you can't figure out how to implement your idea and make money off of it, that ain't my problem, right? Suck it up. Second, there's this thing called the first mover advantage, where if you come up with an idea, you get there first, then you have a huge advantage over the market. You've already got all the capital in place. Maybe it's like a new mousetrap design. You've already got the factory ready to start churning these things out. Your competition has to go, okay, how does this mousetrap work? What is it that about this mousetrap which makes it better? How do we achieve this design with our factories? You know, it will be months before they figure all that shit out and get out the factory in working order. And by that time, everyone knows you as the guy with the best mousetrap in town. They're going to go to you for their mousetrap needs. And sort of a corollary point to this is that people say, well, we need to encourage innovation. Maybe it encourages innovation to have patents. Well, the data doesn't bear that out. Baldwin and Levine go over this in Against Intellectual Monopoly. There are many industries where we're told that we need patents and copyrights, and they go over and it's like, hey, look, all these big innovations in these industries came about without any patents or copyrights, right? All over the place, in medicine and fucking literature, all over the place. And second, you can have too much innovation. You can put too many resources towards innovation, even though I would agree there's maybe some cases where you're encouraging certain innovations to come about by protecting those innovations with a monopoly grant. But that doesn't mean that you should, because you can put too many resources towards certain innovations. Like, one easy example is, let's say we put every single resource on Earth, every single means available to man, towards finding a cure for cancer. We'd probably get there pretty quickly, right? But not before we all starve to death, because nobody's making any more food, right? Nobody's making any more war. Nobody's doing any of these fundamental other things. So you can overproduce, you can oversupply anything, right? That you're supplying more of something doesn't imply that it's good.
Got you. So another question that a lot of people would normally ask when it comes to this is like medication, or things that cost a lot of money in order to create. So like medications, like the research and development in order to create certain medications is like can be really, really expensive. And if somebody can basically take your formula as soon as you're able to put that onto the market, wouldn't that kind of make it much more harder for us to sort of put out drugs, that are able to make a profit?
Well, again, Baldwin and Levine go over in Against Intellectual Monopoly, the medical industry in specific, and they take a list in the past 100 years. Like, there was a big poll done by the British Medical Journal or some other journal like that, where they ranked the biggest medical innovations in the past 100 years, and the majority of them had nothing to do with patents. They were developed without any concern for patenting at all. These were the biggest, best medical innovations as ranked by doctors. Nobody in the development gave a shit about patenting it, right? So that would throw a little bit of a spanner in that works. And if there is some drug, if you find some drug where you do, it will only ever be developed if there's a patent on it, well, then it shouldn't be fucking developed, right? Because fundamentally, there is no property right there. You don't have a right to prevent other people from competing with you. It's a general principle that you don't get to do that. It's illegal. It's a crime, right, to force other people to do what you want them to do. And second, it's a general rule of economics that competition yields better outcomes. It yields more efficient outcomes, a more value productive arrangement of capital. And this is a general rule in economics, right? It doesn't break down suddenly for the medical industry and work elsewhere. It works everywhere, right? So you're going to have more efficient allocation of medical resources.
Got you. No problem. So another thing that a lot of people tend to throw at me is, what about monopolies? What's going to happen, and what's going to stop this firm from buying up all these resources and becoming the largest company and then becoming a monopoly government again? What's to stop that from happening? That's normally if there's no government to basically come in and break up the monopoly. What do you have to say about that?
Sure. So the first point on that is that they are fearful of monopolies. So their solution is to advocate a monopoly, which is a bit strange. Secondly, there isn't any such thing as a natural monopoly. If you have an unhampered market, because what it means to say that something is a monopoly isn't just that they have a huge market dominance, or that, you know, nobody can produce things as well as they do. It means that there isn't free entry into that market. You only get the situation where there isn't free entry into, like, the bromine market or whatever it is, if the government steps in and says nobody else is allowed to produce bromine except for this specific cartel, right? And you get monopolies through things like IP, right? I don't call it IP, I call it intellectual monopoly. That's what it is. It's a monopoly over an idea. And, you know, people have all these ideas about how you could get a natural monopoly. You know, one such idea is predatory pricing. Predatory pricing as a strategy simply doesn't work at all. Because what it means is that you are selling lower than it costs to produce it, right? You're making a loss on it. So people have tried this predatory pricing strategy. One famous example is some guy, Herbert something, I can't remember his name. Herbert J. Dow, that's it. So Herbert Dow, he was a big chemical magnate in the US, and he wanted to expand his business to Europe. So what they did was they said, hey, you're not allowed to sell in Europe, your bromine, or else we're going to sell a bunch of cheap bromine in the US, and we're going to price you out, right? We're going to destroy your business. There was this German cartel which controlled all the bromine in Europe at that time. And he was like, okay, well, I don't really give a shit. So he kept selling in Europe. What they did was they started selling like really, really cheap. They kept lowering their price in the US to sell bromine until they were making a huge loss on it. And what did Herbert Dow do? Well, he started buying up this cheap bromine in the US, storing it, or selling it off in Europe again for a huge markup. And he was making massive arbitrage gains without having to produce the bromine in the first place. And they were just completely, they were quoted as saying, he's become a complete dictator of the situation. Because they had no means to use against him. Every time they tried this to lower the prices, that just gave him a bigger arbitrage profit. And it's like, there's a funny tendency where whenever a company lowers its price, it's called predatory pricing. Whenever they raise their price, it's called price gouging. Whenever it keeps the price the same as another company, it's called price fixing. Right? There's no winning when you're a businessman. Yeah. And this is why Ayn Rand called the industrialist the most oppressed minority in America. Right? They can't do anything right, apparently.
Yeah, it's kind of like when I argue with some people about monopolies, and they'd be like, oh, well, how do you feel it when a company lowers the price of a good or service and puts out another business? I was like, well, if they're selling a good or service at a lower cost to the consumers, well, that's a good thing because we're getting things at a cheaper price. And it's just like, oh, so that you're okay with monopolies taking over and taking people out of their business? You know, it seems like no matter what companies do or business owners do, like there's always going to be some negative like connotation to it, you know? All right. So argumentation ethics. Could you give me like a quick explanation of what argumentation ethics is?
Sure. So the idea is basically they're coming to you and they're saying, hey, you know, they're entering an argument with you. They're entering a debate with you. They're saying, hey, we have a disagreement over how these things should be done. We have a disagreement over who should be in control of these things. And we're going to resolve this disagreement peacefully. We're going to come to the table, talk it out, decide who it is that should control this thing. And if they're a socialist, they're coming to the table and they're saying, hey, we should not peacefully resolve disputes. We should violently resolve disputes. Your non-aggression principle doesn't make any sense. People shouldn't agree with the non-aggression principle. They should be brutes and pummel those over the head whom they disagree with. It's like, okay, well, if you truly agree with that, then why are you talking to me? You know, shut up and, you know, rid us of your presence. If you actually believe that, then you shouldn't be talking. This ties into a point Rothbard makes, where you'll have all these anarcho-Stirnerites swaggering around, talking about how natural law doesn't apply and how you should just beat everyone. He says that they have a duty on their own premises to shut up about it, right? If they genuinely believe that, then why are they even talking to you about it, right? If they really want to take you for a sucker, they should be trying to trick you. If I want to trick someone, if, you know, maybe I'm like a murderer or something, if I'm a serial killer, I'm not going around saying, hey guys, I'm a serial killer. I'm trying to pretend to be a non-serial killer. So I can trick you, and then you'll come back to the dark alley with me and I can stab you, right? If these people aren't just LARPers, and they actually hold their positions, then they should just come up and smack you and take what they want. But they know that they can't do that. They know that they're weak and pathetic, and so they try and come up with all these like hoodoo voodoo excuses. But at the end of the day, if you actually believe that, then shut up. And if you shut up, then you aren't presenting any argument. So the sort of status that a claim like, I shouldn't be arguing with you, I should beat you about the head until you agree with me, that has as much validity as me saying glabu, glebu, glabaglubi, right? It's not even a statement at that point. It doesn't make any sense. I can't evaluate it at all.
Got you. So basically what you're saying is that argument just ethics is that if you say that even if you were to go out and say, I think it's okay to commit an aggression, you're basically kind of being hypocritical, because if you thought it was okay, you wouldn't be saying it. You would just simply be doing it.
Yeah.
Oh, all right. Cool. Got you. All right. So another question that I normally get, because I'm American, I'm not sure how familiar you are with like Native American land and things like that. A lot of the United States land was basically taken over by colonization and things like that. And I normally get the question of like, oh, what should we do about Indian land? Should we give the land back to the Indians, exactly the exact land that was stolen from them at that exact point, because they violated that person's non-aggression principle? Or like how could you solve for an issue that happened so long ago, when the people who are living on it today have like created civilizations and things on top of it?
Yeah, so if you can find a specific Indian guy who like, hey, my great grandfather actually owned this specific patch of land. Here are like, fucking pictures of the teepees here. We'd fenced it all off. We had like a nice little farm going, and then the evil white man came along and took it. Then yeah, fine, he gets his land back. But you can't just have this vague, oh, we're all one with the earth and we all own it in common, and we, no, that's not a genuine claim. You can't just have this Cartesian doubt, is what it's called, of, well, there might be some Indian somewhere who owned this thing. Like, almost all of the US was just virgin wilderness, and like an Indian might pass through there once in a blue moon. Like that isn't enough to establish an ownership claim. Like, if you wanted it, then fucking fence it off and keep hold of it, right? It ain't my problem. And also, it's prima facie, the current possessor is assumed to be the owner, right? You need to come about with evidence which says, hey, actually, they don't own it, because here's the proof that some other guy owns it, and they took it from this other guy, right? And this hasn't ever been done for Indian reparation or black reparation or anything of the sort. It's just said, well, as a collective, blacks have been oppressed, so we need to give whites need to give blacks money. It's like, you're collectivizing the issue, but it's not a collective problem. It's individual. You need to say, hey, Joe Smith over there, he oppressed John Smith over there, right? So Joe Smith needs to give John Smith some money. That is a legitimate claim. This is just a general rule of epistemology. This isn't even a legal thing.
Got you. Okay. I don't know how much time do you have left. Do you have a certain time limit on?
No, I can keep going.
Much I can. Okay, no problem. Because I have like 2-3 more questions. So I heard you say one time that you were against like defamation. Like if somebody were to say like lie about another person, well, not against defamation, but I guess that you're against like banning defamation or lying about another person and ruining their like livelihood by like lying to another person or about another person, and because of that they lost their livelihood. I think you said in a video that if we were to pass a law of like banning like defamation, that would be a restriction of freedom of speech. What's your opinion on that?
Sure. So basically, you don't own your reputation. I'm allowed to, after this stream, maybe I'm a really mean guy. I start contacting everyone and saying, hey, this King Sithis guy, he really sucks. I saw him on stream. He murdered a woman right in front of me. You really shouldn't talk to this guy. I'd be allowed to lie about you all day long. Presumably, you're not going to murder a woman in the rest of the stream, but to make it true. But I'm allowed to lie to you. It certainly makes me a bad person, right? To lie about you. I'm wrong for doing that. It's immoral, but I'm not actually aggressing against anyone because we go back to the definition of a conflict, which is mutually exclusive actions. I'm able to lie about you at the same time as you don't want to be lied about, right? I haven't initiated a conflict with anybody anywhere, right? So that is the problem with banning defamation, is you are controlling people's bodies and what they're allowed to say. People are allowed to be immoral if they want. People are allowed to use their bodies to say, hey, fucking King Sithis, he stabbed a woman right in front of me. They're allowed to say that if they want. It's wrong of them to do it, but they're allowed to do it, presumably, if you haven't actually done it.
Okay. So some people would say, like, if you lie about certain people or lie about a business or something like that, you could cause certain monetary damages to a person. You could cause them to like lose their job. You can cause, monetary harm or some sort of harm. Maybe not physical harm, but like extreme monetary harm to another person. Could there be any sort of consequences for something like that, or for doing something like that, or do you still feel that it is, like you're restricting my free speech by,
The consequences would have to be just disassociation. Like, hey, this person is lying about people all the time. He's a liar. I'm not going to associate with that guy anymore. That's the kind of consequences it would have to be. Or maybe even like, you have a contract, like a covenant, where if you agree on the condition that you say certain lies, that you'll transfer title of like some gold or whatever it is to the person you're lying about. You could have that. That would be fine. But that would all have to be worked out prior. The easier way is just to disassociate with such people. I mean, we've all met like chronic liars and just rotten people, and generally you don't associate with them anymore. That's the way you deal with it. And yeah, it sucks if somebody's losing their job over like a lie about them, but you don't own your job, right? Your boss is paying you money because they think that you produce more value for the company than you cost, right? If that changes, maybe because a bunch of people really hate you and don't want to go to that business anymore, even if it's based on a lie, the boss doesn't owe you a continued job, right? It's his money. He's allowed to pay you if he wants. If you're a liability for the company, he's allowed to fire you. That's it might be nice of him to keep you on to weather the storm with you, but he isn't obligated to do that. He's allowed to do with his money what he wants. Even if you still make a profit for him, he's allowed to disassociate with you because he believes the lie or whatever. It's wrong of him to believe the lie, but he's allowed to do with his money what he wants.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah. I can't argue with that. So I forgot to ask you about this, about when it came to the IP intellectual property thing. Is there any free market way in which you can protect your ideas? Like, could you use, say, something like a non-disclosure agreement or like encryption or things like that to sort of stop people from using your ideas without your consent or whatever?
Sure, I mean, you can use encryption all you want. Like, encryption isn't a problem. And it's very, very effective. The way you would have to structure a non-disclosure agreement is it couldn't just be you agree not to share this idea around, because that's just a promise, right? A contract transfers title to property. That's what it has to be for a contract. So it would have to be something like, on the condition that you spread this company secret with someone, you agree to pay a fee of like $1,000 a year for 10 years. Something like that. Okay. And that would be legitimate.
Okay. So I could be like, so if I wanted to go show some investors, like Shark Tank, I'd be like, hey, I have this idea, sign this non-disclosure agreement. If you say my idea, you would owe me say like $50,000, and if you sign it and you go and say it, you would owe me $50,000. That would be an okay contract. Okay, no problem. This is kind of more of a funnier question, but the other day I was in a debate and a lot of people were really calling me bad faith because I made this analogy, which is essentially that a lot of people were basically saying that taxation is not theft because if you live within a country, you're basically consenting to what is being done to you within that country, you know? And I basically made the argument. I was like, well, was the Holocaust consensual? You know, because those people, they decided to stay in Germany before the Holocaust happened. Would you like? How do you feel about that argument?
Yeah, that follows. Like, it's a valid analogy.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. You know, a lot of people were saying that I was bad faith, and I don't think I was being bad faith.
That's because
I feel like it makes sense.
There's a lot of people who they like the nice, easy arguments. Like, you know, they like to keep in their little bubble. But then you demonstrate to them, hey, but you don't believe this other thing, which follows from your premise, so maybe you should check your premises here. And it riles them up real, something bad, you know. So yeah, you shouldn't concern yourself with such people. They're going to continue to be retarded. You know, there's nothing you can do about that. You can't think for them. But yeah, if you keep showing this into people's faces, keep shoving it down their throats, eventually they're going to get, you know, a certain remnant in the audience will understand what it is that you're saying. And that's who you care about.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. I guess, okay, so I have one last question, and then after that, I'll have questions from the audience. If anybody from the audience wants to ask a question after this last question. Open borders seems to be a pretty big issue right now. It seems like there's well, at least in the United States, I don't know where you live, but in the United States, it's like a pretty big issue with immigration. A lot of some libertarians will be like, oh, we need to close the border. You know, some libertarians say, you know, we need to have full open borders. What's your opinion on the whole situation?
Sure. So I did a video, The Moral Case for Open Borders, a little bit ago. And that is where my stance is. I don't make any of these, you know, hoodoo voodoo economic arguments like, oh, well, you know, the immigrants, they increase GDP or yada, yada. I don't give a shit about any of that, right? All I care about is the question of, well, does the government have the right to restrict immigration? That is the same question as, does the government have a property right in the entire territory that they claim? The answer is, no, they don't. So therefore, they aren't allowed to restrict immigration, which is the open border stance. You know, there are various other arguments, like Hoppe has this net taxpayer theory, where, well, the taxpayers as a whole, they own the public possessions, right? And in the video I say, well, that doesn't really make any sense, because a group can't own something. Taxpayers as a group can't own something. That's the first problem with it. The second problem is, where is the chain of title transfer, which, you know, let's even assume that group property is fine. Where is the chain of title transfer which links, you know, a public highway with the taxpayers in that region? There isn't one, because stealing somebody's money doesn't transfer title of anything, right? If you steal my money and then go off and buy a hot dog with it, I don't own the hot dog. The hot dog vendor owns the hot dog. I own my money. Right? Give me my money back. That's what I want. I still have title to it. So they have title to the money, which is, you know, at present, they can't get it back. Right? It's effectively destroyed. It's been completely taken away and they have no way of tracking it down anymore. It sucks, but that doesn't mean that they suddenly have a group property right in public property, right? It doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm. Got you. So some people would say, oh, but, you know, what about the gangs and the violence and the drugs and the people who are coming over? If we open our borders, all hell will break loose.
Well, I know one such person who'd come over to the US under open borders, who hell wouldn't break loose from, and that's me. You know, the people going to New Hampshire, the libertarian homeland, right? All the free staters, they'd love it, right? This is I mean, yeah, there's certainly bad people out there who would want to come to the US
Yeah.
and cause problems. The conservatives love making the argument, oh, gun laws don't make any sense because it'll only apply to criminals. It'll only apply to law-abiding citizens, and criminals don't follow the law anyway. It's like, well, let's apply that to immigration. Criminals don't follow the law anyway, so they're just going to cross the border and not give a shit, right? We love making that argument when it comes to guns, but suddenly when it comes to immigration, no, that is terrible. We got to shut down the borders.
Yeah. Got you. All right, man. Well, that's pretty much my last question to you. I appreciate, you have it coming on. If anybody wants to answer a question or ask a question, just raise your hand in the audience.
That was Lego. You got to keep it to one question. I'm not explaining my paper to you because I know that's.
Yeah, let's keep it one question and let's not turn it into a debate. All right, guys. So I'm gonna let you up, Lego. All right, go ahead.
All right. So you said earlier that not possible to have multiple owners. So my question would be, if we don't presuppose your definition of ownership as being exclusive to an individual, why is it that you cannot have multiple owners?
Well, in my course, where I developed this theory in the fullest form, I don't assume property rights are individual. I derive that from the theory of non-aggression. I'm like, okay, well, we've got a non-aggression principle. From there, we get these things called property rights. Okay, and from property rights, what are some implications of this property theory? Well, the first implication would be that you can't have group property rights. It doesn't make any sense. I didn't assume at the head a property right is something in which it has to be individual. I derived it. I didn't assume it and then derive from the assumption. I started from just the bare essentials of what a property right must be. It's a conflict avoiding norm, right? From that, you can't have a group property right. It isn't defined as individual. It's derived to be individual.
All right, no problem. Anybody else want to ask a question? Neuralist? All right, no problem.
Boys, how are we?
I think you're muted, Neuralist.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Can you hear me, Sithis?
Oh.
May have lagged out or something.
Oh, yeah, now I can hear you. Sorry, go ahead.
Hey, man, I've been thinking a little bit more on this, because on Twitter, of course, the libertarians are having a big schism over the border issue. And I've been wanting to chat with either you or Sue or some others about essentially what I regard to be an issue, not necessarily of property per se, but of say, right, of a rightful claim of something, right? So like if the border is being secured, even if it's against my will, which, by the way, I'm an open borders kind of fellow like you guys. But at the same time, it's like if my money is being stolen and our money is being stolen to maintain the border, then how come is it that we don't have any say whatsoever over how that border is maintained? Yeah.
All right.
Not just do we not have any say over it, but the people that would be coming through the border, given an ideal libertarian society, have more say over it than what we do, even though our money is being forcefully stolen from us. And go on.
They don't have more say over it than you. The claim made by the open borders position is that nobody has a say over it because it hasn't been homesteaded yet. So people are allowed to go into the US, go into fucking barren wilderness or into somewhere where they're allowed to be, whatever it is. People are allowed to go there, and nobody is allowed to tell them, no, you're not allowed to do that. Even if people are being robbed in the home country by a mafia who is telling people not to go there, that doesn't mean that those people suddenly get a right to say, well, I want to choose who's not allowed to go there. Like, it simply doesn't follow. Because, he was saying that it's not a property issue, but it's just a say issue. Well, that is a property issue. The issue is, do you have a say over who's allowed to be excluded, right? Because property rights are rights of exclusion. It's the Deus Ex principle of let exclusion stand. A property right means the right to exclude people from something.
All right. G, you want to ask a question? All right, I'll bring you up.
Yeah, hello.
Yep, we can hear you.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question about well, Sithis, you remember the discussion we had, right? I mean, it was touched on a little bit here, but I think like to clarify, Zulu, I just want to be clear on this. I don't understand how this NDA contract is actually a valid contract, right? I mean, it seems like a stolen concept to me.
So the way
in the sense that yeah, in the sense that like it's just a promise, right? There's no like actual title transfer going on if they don't say anything, right?
Right. So that is what I said. The NDA contract would have to be something like, on the condition that you share the secret, you agree to transfer title of fucking 50 grams of gold to somebody else, right? It would have to be like that. If it is just you agree not to share the secret with anybody, that's not a contract. That's just a promise.
Okay. I don't think there's anybody left in the audience to ask questions. So, yeah, I think that's pretty much the end of that. Liquid Zulu, I really appreciate you coming on to the Nexus Discord and having a chat with me. You know, thank you for coming on, man. Appreciate you.
Yeah. I'll see you next time.
Yeah, man. And I hope to have another discussion with you in the future, or you know, maybe hang out with you all some other time. And again, thank you for coming on, and I hope to see you another time, man.
Cool. Yeah. See ya. Oop.